Chapter 4 Emergency Secret Council. With nothing but slow-burning candles for reading light, the elderly wizard Dedlin Dane, leaning like a bent twig over his antique hand-carved Richmond table, squinted hard at a flake-edged page of an old black book, trying diligently to translate the puzzling text. It was written in ancient Heesh, certainly not his language of preference or expertise, but finding other scholars to help him with his personal projects had been more difficult as of late. Silk robes of crimson and gold, the colors of the Tungulan hierarchy, hung loosely from his wiry frame, draping at his feet like melted wax. The reading specks on his hooked nose glowed in the warm light, casting dual reflections on the cluttered mantle before him. Except to turn the pages, the only motion in his room was the slight movement of his bright eyes working up and down the handwritten scripture. Around the room, hundreds of other unlit candles sat atop mountains of melted wax that had dripped from the shelves to the floor in beautiful colored fountains. A soft goose-down bed filled one corner. A cabinet full of charts and maps was next to that. An old cedar chest sat beside the door, and an old gray cat with cataracts was folded up on a straw mat in front of a slowly dying chimney fire. Every inch of his study was filled with books, thousands of them, large, small, old, new, thick and thin. Raising an arthritic finger to his tongue, he tenderly, reverently, turned the yellowed page, careful not to dismember it from its rotted backing, and he pressed it gently into place with his palm. Since mid-afternoon, Dedlin had been deciphering a series of rare Doxus accounts concerning the dark arts and militant field tactics of the Garnian nation, specifically regarding emergency field codes and communications. It was old and outdated, but still possibly very relevant. He drained the last few drops of a hazelnut liquor from his silver chalice and yawned. He was very tired, but he could not yet lie down for the night. The king, great-grandson of the king Dedlin had first served there, had granted his request for audience. More than that, he had summoned Dedlin to a secret council meeting. It had been a long time since the wizard had been summoned to secret council, and Dedlin found it a bit ironic. He was considered antiquated now, nothing but a living reminder of the old monarchy. Eccentric, and yes, somewhat theatrical and animated at times, and of outdated high ideals. Some of the youngest members of the cabinet suggested that he was certifiable. Yet, even sitting alone in his private library, Dedlin liked to believe that he carried about him an air of dignity, honor, and etiquette. At one time, long ago, Dedlin Dane had been High Wizard to the king. He had been young, powerful, and influential, his journeys far-reaching, his wisdom vast, his magic deep and creative, his advice renowned and well-regarded. Indeed, at a time, his singular actions had shaped the foundations for civilization in central Galgaria as it currently existed. Now he was all but forgotten, tucked away into a dark corner of the castle like so much unneeded furniture. His mind often wandered to those glorious days when Tungulan was little more than a few towers with one lone wall to keep the wolverines of the forest at bay, when the wilds were unknown and mostly uncharted, and the dealings of the evil Garnians were not even whispered anymore. He almost nodded off to sleep with those thoughts floating around his head like familiar ghosts, when something stirred in his old heart, causing him to suddenly sober. He looked up and glanced about the small room as if expecting to find someone standing there in the shadows before him. He found this sensation most peculiar, but instead, everything was perfectly sound as it should be. "It must be indigestion," he said aloud, forcing a burp. With a wheezing cough and a shake of his shaggy head, he managed to continue his repose. Then he felt it again. It was as if there had been some psychic voice arise from the silence of the room, a harbinger of welcome news. Dedlin straightened up to listen better, his head cocked first one way and then the other. He looked curiously about his study, focusing hard. He realized then what it was. It was that sense, that special wizardly skill he used to have when somehow he just knew something. "He's here," he said with a degree of excitement and awe. The cat looked up from the mat for a moment, and then it resumed his nap, purring loudly. Devlin smiled warmly. "I have lived to see the day. He has arrived at last." He placed a wide red bookmark between the pages to hold his place, and placed the old manuscript in its exact place in the dusty bookshelf to his left. He turned his antique chair to stretch his old, cold legs. "My gracious me, the time has actually come," he said, cackling for a second, "and just in time for council, too." Walking up the stairs was painful. Devlin's joints ached. He leaned heavily on his old, twisted walking stick, relying on it much more now than he used to. The chambers were empty and dark, even from the landing. He hadn't realized how late it had gotten. An orchestra, somewhere far down the main hall, was playing a solemn symphony, but it was too far away to discern the melody. Outside, the spherical lanterns along the garden path were still glowing hazily beyond the amber and crimson stained glass curtains that extended from the intricately painted ceilings to the polished wooden floors. The air grew cool in the music chambers on early summer evenings, so special attention was placed on protecting the rare and valuable instruments. It had been Devlin's personal job to see to it, and now that the matters of men and politics were in some young wizard's hands, "They'll have to get someone else to take care of all this now," he wheezed. "A new custodian, as it were." He ran his fingers across a harp as he passed it by. The random notes floated melodiously out into the darkness. The chambers were ghostly at night. The hazy light barely piercing the translucent curtains cast pillars of colored light up the carved walls beside the huge wooden doors. The adjacent hall, full of ancient treasures, Borgen horns, stringed golandolas, eloquent silver flutes from ancient Nordia that no one could master anymore, rare Eofian tree drums and wind chimes, miniature takamines, and much more, was like a museum of the bizarre. "I will miss this old place," he muttered. "Yes, I will." He hobbled on, his mind on the secret council, but more importantly, the uncertain future ahead. Many things needed to be revealed, and very quickly. But who would listen to an outdated, crippled, senile old wizard? He allowed himself a cynical laugh. "I got a few tricks left," he said to himself. "They oughtn't try to bury me just yet." A young Gythote secretary had just been walking by, carrying a stack of papers toward the choral hall. He nodded patronizingly to the old wizard, who always seemed to be talking to himself. Devlin slipped through the thick wooden doors over 5 times his height and disappeared into the night beyond. Next part. The twin suns began lowering in the southwest between 2 rugged peaks of the Great Subring mountain line, casting the long shadows of the giant tundra trees halfway up the gray brick castle walls. The northeastern skies were deep violet, shading gradually across the heavens to pink and gold where the tall, billowy clouds chased the suns toward the horizon. Several silvery stars had presented themselves, frozen cold upon the deep velvet ceiling beyond the mountains, twinkling clearly. One of the tallest towers in Tugulin was Westwatch. Lake Tobias and Clan Methylard, the same 2 guards who had so narrowly escaped death at the hands of Habad and Terzda in Derouge a couple of weeks before, had been assigned the evening rounds at Westwatch. They had just finished a light dinner and were enjoying a good smoke as they watched the sights of the bustling city far below them, when after a few minutes of pensive silence that had followed a dead-end conversation concerning the weather, Clan asked his friend, "You think we'll ever get off this rock, my friend?" Lake shrugged absent-mindedly. "Someday, probably, maybe. I want to be an explorer, Lake, sometime before I die. I want to travel, to see the 4 corners of the kingdom. It's what I've always wanted to do ever since I was a wee boy. I'm beginning to think it's never going to happen." "Oh, sure it will." "Please, don't patronize me," Quan said. What about you? Don't you want to see the desert, the plains, the ocean, other cities beyond the rock? Me? No, I'm fine right here in the mountains, Lake replied. I like castle life. I'd like to visit a few places, sure, but I know where my home is. He took a deep puff on his pipe. Besides, I'm getting too old to be running off out there somewhere now. It's time for me to settle down for good, I think. Get married, have children. The wilds are no place for a man with a family. Quan considered Lake's words. I suppose, he replied. The wind, as always, was gusty. It blew their hair about and howled in the conical towers above their heads. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, I was down at level 3 near the King's Hospital this afternoon, and guess what I heard? A doctor was talking about the Prince of Persia, Gabriel Din Dayan, being here. He's being treated for injuries from a fight or something. Oh, well, there you go then, Quan. You know his kind, vagabond, really. Comes and goes as he pleases, willy-nilly. See, that's what I'm talking about. What a lifestyle being a ranger. He goes all over the place. His whole life is one big, great adventure. Gabriel trained for years to survive in the wilds, Quan. We didn't. It's that simple. I don't know why you just don't accept your place and be happy. It's not that bad, being a castle ranger. I mean, the pay's not bad. It's a good, respectable life. I just think there's more to life than being a castle ranger, that's all. Like, I don't know, being a Skara pirate for a while, or training as a master pilot. I even thought about going to Arisia and competing in the week of 11 trials. I'm not bad with a sword. With a little exercise, I think I'd have a chance of winning. We're nearing our 30s, my friend, and I don't know if you've looked in the mirror lately, but your midsection isn't getting any smaller. When is the last time you even trained? Well, you're a barrel of optimism, Lake, Quan replied, and they both took deep puffs again, blowing out their smoke in unison. Quan continued. Anyway, Prince Gabriel was injured fighting some monster, they say, a famous assassin. Yeah, he must be a good fighter. I suppose I would like to see him in real life, see what he looks like. You think he's really as cold-blooded as everyone says? He trained here for years, sometimes in the same arenas that I did, Quan said. Of course, I never met him because I was in the public classes. Gabriel trained personally with the king's wizards and soldiers. Lake smiled. Such is fate, Quan. Those who were born into royalty. He paused, squinting out into the dim twilight. Look! He shouted, pointing at the horizon. Look at that. Do you see it? There. It's on fire. For a few fleeting seconds, Lake and Quan watched a burning skycraft with an orange flaming trail behind it come racing frantically through a low place in the nearest foothills. It went spiraling down into the Galothian forest, not too far from the dark neighboring castle city Bondoon, leaving behind it a thick black trail of smoke. By the gods, Lake said. Could anyone have survived that? Quan asked. I'm sure the Gogmors will get there before we do, Lake said. Now hand me the comm and keep an eye out while I call this in. Bondoon, a smaller adjacent castle city that shared the valley with Castle City Tungulin, rose from the wispy fog like a withered, many-fingered hand, rotten and decrepit. A fierce warlock called Gawain had ruled the brutal Gogmors there for nearly 100 years. Tungulin officials always kept a close watch on Bondoon, but did not interfere with them, respecting their simple laws and fluctuating boundaries. Before Gawain's rule, the Gogmors had been much worse, a constant nuisance, looting and occasionally attacking outlying Tungulin farms. Scattered confrontations with the Gogmors were still commonplace, but over the decades, Gawain had brought some semblance of order to the brutish race. Although they instituted no immediate threat to Tungulin or her inhabitants, away from the protection of walls, there was no telling what the Gogmors were capable of. All castle rangers had been on alert recently, and they had been told to monitor any unusual or suspicious activity and to immediately report the findings up the chain of command. Just as Lake threw a priority pass into the comm to contact Commander Binder's staff at Defense Command, 2 more dark ships came cruising through the mountain pass, great silver, black, and red warships, each themselves the size of a small city. By the gods, Lake repeated, but this time much more emphatically. Next part. There was a knock on the door. The boy, awakening from a late nap, sat up and propped himself up in a nest of soft pillows, wondering about the time. He cleared his throat. Come in, he said. Gabriel smiled as he entered, gently closing the door behind him. Hello there, it's been 6 days. I thought I'd visit you if it's all right, he said. Yes, of course, please, come in. The boy looked well. He was clean, well-fed, finally, and dressed in a loose-fitting cotton shirt and breeches common to the youth of Tungulin. His leg was bandaged with clean, professional dressings. His eyes looked bright and his skin a healthy honey color. How are you? The prince asked. Better. You? Oh, I've seen better days, he admitted, pointing to the bandages on his head, elbows, and leg. But then again, I've seen worse. The physicians here, they're masters. Yes. My leg is still a mess. My head feels better, but on my back, I'm not used to being saddled for so long. If the boy understood the joke, he did not show it. I was just having a nap, he replied, and I fear I've slept too long. Well, Gabriel said, limping across the small room to a bedside chair, tonight is the New Year's celebration. I was just out in the public park this evening, looking at the sights, enjoying a beautiful sunset and trying to get this bum leg of mine to cooperate a little. It was very nice out. Should be a perfect night for a celebration. I'm sorry I missed it. I'm sure all the nice young ladies you talked to helped to make you feel better. He mumbled, then laughed. You were watching? I could see you from my window. Quite the ladies' man, I'm led to believe. Well, it's been a while since I've had the company of a lady, if you know what I mean. Yes, I'm afraid I do. Gabriel felt oddly scrutinized. Anyway, I was thinking while I was out there, I wanted to ask you to do something with me tomorrow night if you're not too busy. As I probably told you, King Vantu is an old friend and ally of the family. He has summoned me to a secret council, which was originally scheduled 3 days from now, but has been moved up to tomorrow after dinner. I thought that maybe you'd like to come along with me. Get out of this cramped room for a bit, meet some of the local dignitaries. The boy smiled and looked at him with eyes as sharp as arrows. It isn't as boring as it sounds. You might find it interesting, Gabriel said. It's quite an honor. Yes, we'll go to council together, the boy replied. I would be honored, sir. Always so formal, Gabriel said, again displaying his unique smile, but only for a moment. When he looked up again, he felt as though the blood was leaving his face. He was troubled. But that's not the only reason I wanted to see you. Yes? I'm still confused. The boy nodded. If you're referring to the event on the mountainside, he explained, I can only suppose that your blaster fired a blank, or that Habad missed me altogether and just hit the nearby rocks. I'm not sure. I'm at a loss just as you are. But I saw the whole thing. The impact. Oh, I should be dead. That is what you mean to say. Yes. Yet here I am alive. I have no explanation for you. I've pondered this endlessly, and I'm flummoxed as you are. I can only say that I remember nothing but an intense white flash and then a moment of absolute darkness. Gabriel sighed. The mysteries continue to multiply and deepen then, he replied. Habad, the only one who might know what happened for sure, had left no trail to follow. The old assassin had apparently disappeared into thin air, his mission, in retrospect, a failure. The boy spun towards his nightstand and poured them both a glass of fresh cinnamon tea. Well, here we are, he said, safe and sound, in the grandest castle city in all Galgaria. I am immeasurably relieved and grateful. Thank you for getting me here safely, Gabriel. I mean that. I could never have made it here without you. You are welcome, sir, he answered, taking his glass, and I hope you find what you seek here. The boy sat back, making himself comfortable. He caught Gabriel's curious glance and smiled in turn. After a deep sigh, he said. Perhaps the time has finally come for a bit of explanation. Gabriel smiled. I cannot tell you all, but yet I can offer you a tidbit, I suppose enough to hopefully satiate. Long overdue, he said, adjusting himself. He took a deep breath and squared himself, wondering where to begin as he cleared his throat. Well, Gabriel, essentially I've come all the way to Tugulin just to find someone. A man. Probably very old now. A man who, I hope, still serves here. I've come to ask for his assistance and advice. He is called Dedlin Dain. He is a wizard here, I've heard, if he is in fact still alive. Gabriel frowned. I don't know him. Nor do I, the boy said, other than by story and reputation. And so I do not know whether or not I can truly trust him, since all that is known of him comes from sources long since discarded. I've heard he has old maps and knows the old stories better than anyone else in the kingdom. I was told by many counselors and advisors that he alone can help guide me on what I must do next to help direct me to, he chose his words carefully, a place, a secret place, reputably lost now for eons, a place that I must now seek out with some urgency, and hopefully he can tell me what I must do to arrive there. Gabriel was not a little intrigued with this story and vague riddles. He was, after all, an explorer by nature. What he wanted to know most of all about all of this is why. So until I know for certain whether he or King Ventu or anyone else here can be trusted, I must be very, very cautious. There are dangerous enemies about, as you have seen firsthand, and there are eyes and ears in every corner. At this juncture, I believe that there is only one individual I can now trust wholeheartedly because it has been proven. That individual is you. Gabriel nodded. Yes, you can. Therefore, I have a favor to ask. A favor? Yes, a favor, if I may. I would like to entrust something to you, something unique and precious. You have proven your valor to me, and so on you alone I will depend. Hold on to this for me and bear it safely until I ask for it again, he said, revealing a small stone key that now hung from a chain around his neck. It is more precious than any amount of gold or jewels or magic power in this land. Haban and Tirzah are not the only ones who desire this trinket. There are far worse than they who would have it. Gabriel bore a puzzled and yet an interested expression. So this is it. This is Habad's key. It is the key, but it's not Habad's by any means, the boy corrected. It is holy and precious, Gabriel. Gabriel stood, slightly reprimanded, playing along as if it were a game. I am at your service, gladly, for as long as you require, he told him with a royal bow. The boy held it up before them, dangling from a silver chain, and the light coming in through the open window. The key was slate gray, stone or metal, Gabriel could not tell, smooth yet ornate, with tiny detailed thread-thin markings on it that glistened like wet spider webs. It had an unusual Gothic shape. It did not appear as a key just so, but as a strange letter of some strange ancient alphabet. It is very interesting. Hopefully, Dedlin will be able to explain its purpose, the boy said. He looked at him with fierce eyes. Please guard it with your life. Gabriel nodded. I already have, he said honestly. We both have. Another knock came from the door, and the boy acknowledged it. Lake Tobias, the castle ranger captain, nervously stuck his head through. He looked at Gabriel with eyes wide and unblinking. Excuse me, your highness, but I was told you might be here. King Ventu requests your presence in his meeting hall immediately. Secret council has been called even earlier because of some new developments. It's an emergency. Very well, Gabriel said, nodding. Tell them I'm on my way, and let them know that I'll have a guest with me. The nervous castle ranger bowed deeply and backed out of the door. New developments, the boy repeated. I do not like the sound of it. I'll get dressed right away. All right, we'll just stop right there and divide it up. This chapter's fairly long. I'm going to divide it into 3 parts. So that was part number 1.